Hi there and welcome. Let's talk about this, excuse me, this concept here that you have on the screen. Science is CONPTT, which is a really good way that you can test if something is a science or if a scientific statement is indeed a scientific statement. So what we have here is a Google slide deck, and you can look at this in many different ways. You can look at it this way. Make sure you can realize you can adjust the slider here so you can read my speaker notes below. You can also go into the present mode and look at it like that. And then you want to maybe click on the notes option here. Right, there we go. And then maybe that's the way you want to look at it, where you have the slides and then the notes, excuse me, and you can move this back and forth so you can see the slide and the notes. So 3 different ways for you to look at these slide decks. I'm just going to go with the very basic one here. Okay, science is these 6 things, 6 criteria for science. Let's step through them. Consistent, right? Science is consistent. Now, that's a little bit more difficult to achieve consistency if you do earth science, if you do your experiments in nature, right? Nature is a little bit more chaotic, more variable than you might find in a lab setting or if you do computer modeling. But obviously your results have to be consistent and they have to be obviously also reproducible by other scientific researchers. Observable, right? Of course, that's the key and one key of the science is that what we are doing can be explained and observed. If we can't observe it consistently, if we can't measure it, if we can't do an experiment on it, if we can't collect empirical data, then we can't explain it with science. Here's a big one. Science is natural, right? So that is really relevant, that there's a natural causal mechanism to explain why naturally occurring things happen. Now, that doesn't mean there is no such thing as a supernatural force or supernatural entity or supernatural something, right? Science cannot rule that out, but you cannot invoke the supernatural as explanations in the scientific process. Science is predictable, right? You can watch that Richard Feynman video again. That's the key part, that you can make you can make predictions based on your educated guess, and then you can test those predictions against experiment. That's the key to science. Testable, right? So that you can do controlled experiments, that you can look at the causes and mechanisms of natural occurring events. Now again, it's a little bit more tricky in earth sciences. If you're measuring things, if you are testing things in nature, nature has a way to be a little bit chaotic, a little bit messy. Nature is not a perfectly controlled lab experiment, but even then, even earth sciences, geology, geography, the sort of stuff that I do is testable. And then here's the last one. Science is tentative, and that's important, right? Science is not a fixed body of facts and knowledge and laws, right? Science constantly changes. There's constant revisions, constant corrections to the scientific body of knowledge, right? And it's entirely possible that certain explanations, certain theories might prove to be incorrect, right? So that's an important part of science as well. Science is a dynamic process rather than a fixed monolithic structure. That's really important. Now, that's all nice and well, but there are limits of science. Science is really the best tool we have to understand the natural world. If you want to understand the natural world, science is really the best tool we have. Beyond that, though, right, there are some limits of science, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of questions, a lot of topics where science cannot help you with. You cannot find the answers to such things as faith, spirituality, values, morality in science. That doesn't work, right? There's a lot of questions, a lot of things that you have to make decisions on as humans, as people, where science doesn't help you, right? So that's a relevant thing. We want to talk more about this idea of the limits of science as well, that we understand those. A few more definitions here. the 4 types of science: science, proto-science or emergent science, non-science, and pseudoscience. So let's step through these. Well, we have science, you know what that is, right? We've talked about that. We don't have to talk about that again. Let's talk about a non-science. Well, a non-science is obviously the opposite of a science, right? So obviously, you know, if you look at your criteria of science, CONPTT, obviously a non-science does not meet those criteria, right? That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with non-science, and they might be logical, right? But they do not fall into the realm of science. So that's something to remember, right? Nothing wrong with non-science, but let's not confuse non-science with science. We have something called proto-science or emerging science, something sometimes also called near-science. You know, these are things that meet some of the criteria of the CONPTT, but fall short in some of them. So usually the observations aren't consistent, the predictions aren't consistent, and or limited by knowledge and technology. However, sometimes there's cases where sort of a proto-science leads to a science. The perfect example here is herbalism, that then as a scientific version of that is pharmacology. And then we have finally pseudoscience, false science, right? That is non-science, but it is portrayed, it is advertised, it is promoted by its supporters as legitimate science. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. Nothing wrong with non-science. It's just let's keep non-science, and not confuse it with actual science, because then it becomes a pseudoscience. Astrology is a perfect example, right? And there's many other examples of that. So that's what I wanted to quickly emphasize for you. So you have the slide deck, so you can review the slide deck on your own as well. So you have it a little bit shorter, it's a little bit slower. Now remember, this is a YouTube video, so you can also slow down, you can pause, you can speed up if I talk too fast or I talk too slow. Here's the slide sorter. This is the slides we looked at. And you have this slide deck available both as the actual slide deck, but then also as this YouTube video. All right, thanks for watching.